Welcome back to Secret Weapons. Today we're taking a look at the Skylar Reverb and the Orca delay from GFI. I'm excited to be doing this review today because to this day, my GFI Specular Tempus review is one of my most viewed videos on this channel. I think it has a lead of about 20,000 over the next most popular video I've done here. When I originally did that video, I think it was like my second or third review on this channel, I think I mostly focused on the delay side of things and maybe just the really washy reverbs. And that's so interesting because over time, my use case for that pedal has evolved. For a while, it was just delays. I was using it for its tape delay on almost everything I played live. And then in the last year or so, I've become obsessed with it as a plate delay, and it's almost the only thing I use it for anymore, just because it's the thing that pedal does better than anybody else does plates. And I think that's super valuable. And I think that evolving use case actually makes me really excited about these two offerings from GFI. The Skylar Reverb and the Orca delay are stripped down, focused, almost like curation of everything that the Specular Tempus had to offer. On the Orca, you have just a selection of delays from the Specular Tempus, and the Skylar has a selection of reverbs. It's not all of the delay engines and it's not all of the reverb engines, but they both offer a pretty wide range of sounds from the original with the kind of necessary features that you would expect, but maybe not all of the extra frills that some people don't need. So let's talk about what's here and what's not here in these two pedals. So when I say stripped down but feature rich, what am I talking about? Well, on these devices, you have two presets. You have stereo in and out via TRS, which is actually really great because you have proper stereo on a really, really impressively small footprint. You have four knobs, each one of them clicks. Here you go. You heard that. And you can click it to access a submenu, or you can press and twist to access secondary functions on all those knobs. So you still have a lot of control over this. You have expression and tap tempo input on the top, and you have two presets, and you don't have MIDI, which is tough for me. I'll be honest about that. On the Orca, the lack of MIDI does hurt me a little bit, not being able to send in global time over MIDI. You do have a tap tempo input, and if you're using a Specular Tempus, there are some fun workarounds that will get your MIDI clock into this, believe it or not. But I think that's the purpose of releasing these. This is all the features that somebody who wants the sounds from the Tempus, but maybe isn't interested in making that jump to MIDI would want. If you want the big box experience with all of the frills and all of the insane control and CC customization and all that stuff, the Specular Tempus is there, and it's a great offering. These guys are, I think, more targeted towards that middle ground. I want a preset, I want tap tempo, I need some of those extra frills, but I'm not really interested in the MIDI thing. I don't want a dedicated controller on my board to do things like preset switching through a whole 128 presets or a bunch of like individual CC parameter controls. These are incredibly accessible, incredibly quick to dial in. And like I said, with two presets, you can get a lot of mileage out of that. I think that honestly, I would be totally fine running the Skylar as my main reverb on a board, because if you've seen a lot of what I do around here, it's very frequently a dialed in super washy reverb and a dialed in tighter plate mode for like chords and higher gain stuff. And I mean, the AB on this, the first thing I did with this pedal was I dialed in a big spatium, we're not doing that joke again, mode. And then I flipped over to preset B, dialed in a nice 70s plate, which it still sounds amazing. And I was done. I had my two key sounds in this pedal so quickly, and you can get to them really, really easily. Jumping back over to the Orca, I talk about the lack of MIDI clock being a bummer. Access to tap tempo is still great. Access to tap on here or being able to pull up those two presets on here is also really, really great. Having said all that, there is something that I really, really like they have added to the control parameters on this device itself. You now have the ability to press and twist this modes control down here to create ping-ponging delay from like very narrow mono all the way out to giant super wide stuff on almost all the modes on this thing. There's a ton of stereo image flexibility baked into a non-MIDI pedal, which I think has a lot of power offered right there. I feel like we don't have to talk a lot about the sound quality on these devices, mostly because if you've watched my Specular Tempus review, you'll know most of what I think about the sounds in these devices. It's the same stuff as the Tempest, but stripped down into a smaller and more accessible format. So instead of talking about how the individual sounds are in kind of this format, we'll get to the sound samples in just a minute here and get to do something that we haven't gotten to do before, which is really exciting, which is pairing GFI's delay modes to the reverb modes, which I wasn't able to do with just the singular Specular Tempus. But let's just quickly run through what is available on these pedals, what is on each of these mode-wise from the Tempest. On the Skylar, you have the Spatium, the Plate, the Tremble, and the Shimmer. So you basically have a Shimmer, which can be octave up or octave down. You have the Tremble, which is the modulated reverb that is like a tremolo reverb that if you've seen my Tempest review, you'll know that I rant and raved about how much I loved it. The Spatium, which is kind of their giant modulated ambient reverb. I think it sounds incredible. It's kind of their version of, I guess you would call it like kind of the Clouds or the Cathedra or whatever from other kind of like noteworthy super ambient reverbs, but moving from more of a like pillowy thing over the kind of like staccato-y multi-tap reverb. And the 70s Plate, which is again and forever my favorite plate algorithm anyone has ever made. I think it just sounds incredible. Having that on here, having that in Spatium on here really is everything I needed, but having that octave up and octave down Shimmer and having that tremolo really, really does round this out and make it a very versatile reverb pedal, which is awesome. Let's jump over to the Orca. So on the Orca, you have digital, you have tape, you have diffused, and you have ambiental. Digital delay is, a digital delay that has 3 different voicings from like lo-fi up to pristine digital clean repeats. The tape sounds excellent. It's got wow and flutter as secondary controls, and I really, really love the tape mode in these guys. It was kind of my go-to sound on the original Specular Tempus, despite the fact that it wasn't available on the device itself and that you had to access it through the desktop editor. I really loved the tape mode, and I thought it was a really strong showing, and I'm very glad to see it kind of get a official in-device release on the Orca. And the ambiental mode is the thing that kind of opened the piece at the start of this video. It's a pitch shifted delay where you can pick the kind of like presence of the pitch shifting, how quickly it comes in, and what your interval is from an octave down up through an octave up. It can really create some really interesting textures, and it was something that I've really fallen in love with more and more as I've used the Tempest over the years since my original review. The diffused is kind of a take on the digital delay, but with reverb added to the delay repeats. So your dry signal won't get the reverb, but all the delay repeats do. You can control the amount and the decay on that reverb as well as the tonality of the reverb, which actually can create some really interesting dramatic moments in terms of like a single dry note and then this big wide reverb trail that comes in with the delay. I think my only real issue that I would say with either of these devices comes at this point in the video, and that's with the Orca delay. I really appreciate the desire to stay to 4 algorithms per. I think it's a very unique and helpful way to go. Maybe you want something sound-wise from the GFI line, but the Specular Tempus feels like overkill. This is a great way in. My only gripe might be that I maybe wouldn't have included that diffused delay on the Orca. I think that maybe the analog delay, or more likely the some of the multi-tap options that the Specular Tempus brought to the table, would have been a better offering for that spot on this one. I think that most people who are getting something like this are probably pairing it off with a reverb of some kind, and I just don't know that I would need the way that the diffused delay is implemented on this over something like the dual gold mode or the multi-tap modes on the Specular Tempus. I just found that the stereo image on those and the rhythmic element brought to the table on some of those modes really was something unique and was really something that could really elevate a piece in a way that I just don't know that this will do for that specific algorithm. But I have to say, if my only gripe is one algorithm ported over from the Specular Tempus for these devices, I'd say it's a pretty minor complaint. And I find that these are a really, really great option for somebody who, like I said, doesn't need that big box crazy delay thing. I guess I would say that these kind of remind me a little bit of Strymon's kind of small box offerings in terms of not wanting to make the jump to something like a Volante or a Timeline or a Big Sky, but instead want something like a Blue Sky or an LCAP or a Dig. But with those being a small device that predates the big, more complete thing. The beauty of these coming second in my mind is being able to parse down the right features and not feeling like these are anemic by comparison. These feel like a really, really strong way to showcase some of those sounds and a really great way to get into some really killer GFI sounds without having to feel like you have to commit to the size, the complication, and the price tag of something like the Specular Tempus. So let's get to the part of the video that I'm really excited about, which is getting to showcase how these two devices play against each other. I was really excited when these showed up because I was so looking forward to being able to do exactly that. I've honestly wanted a second Specular Tempus for a long time just for this purpose, and now I don't need one. So let's dive into these. As always, let's start things off with our clean tone. We are using a 1972 Fender Mustang into the 1981 Inventions DRV, the Empress Compressor Mark II. The Orca and the Skylar both set in stereo to the Walrus ACS1 for our amplifier. It's set up as a Fender amp into the Pinstripe pedals DISO Plus, which is acting as our DI, headed into Universal Audio's Luna DAW, where we are using a Neve 1073 as our preamp going into the interface. So that is what all that sounds like without the Skylar or the Orca engaged. All right, let's bring in the Orca set as a digital delay. And the Skylar set as a plate. And going from my kind of like, that was the first plate sound that I dialed in as my preset. Really love it. And then let's jump over to the big washy Spatium reverb that I love. So you just saw there was the secondary functions on the tape mode in this thing. You've got access to your wow, your flutter, and and dialing back either the high or the low roll off. So you can go for kind of an old worn tape that kind of gets darker as the repeats happen, or kind of a more traditional low end roll off, leaving you with kind of that like thinner, brittler thing where you have a lot of the presence of the repeats without it mudding up your chordal structure, which is really, really nice to be able to control. Let's go back to that plate for a second. So you can kind of hear really what's happening with those repeats. We'll also crank up the repeats on the Orca, and we'll play around with some of the ping-ponging options that this thing brings to the table. So we'll start here at 0. You can kind of hear, there's still some stereo width to it. But it feels much more like a Haas effect kind of thing, where it's not moving back and forth in the mix. It's just kind of existing very centrally. And we'll dial back the high and low a little bit. Or sorry, we'll dial back the wow and the flutter a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to play a little riff with the panning set all the way at 10, so you get all of that stereo ping-ponging width, and then we'll dial it down to 0. We'll play the exact same thing. I'm going to take out the section where I make the change, just so you can hear it a little more starkly as it jumps from one to another. The nice thing about the strong kind of stereo imaging given on with the ping-ponging set to 0 is it's not taking you all the way down to mono, but it is keeping you from losing information on the left or the right side. So say you're playing in stereo. If you're not standing dead center on the speakers, you can still get all of your kind of like time-based information. It's really, really good implementation of the Haas effect. You can kind of hear those repeats. They're happening left and right together really effectively. But when you start giving some like rhythmic information, it sounds like it starts to sound a lot like you're getting a ping-ponging thing even though you're not. Whereas now if we jump back to the full ping-pong, you'll be able to tell the difference. There it is. Okay, let's jump into some of the weirder delay modes on this thing. And let's turn off the reverb for a second and jump into that diffused echo that we talked about earlier. Like I said, it's not my favorite thing on here. I wish that something else had taken its spot, but that doesn't mean it's not without its merits. So let's screw around with it a little bit and see what we can get. Okay, let's start with something crazy. This is the verb maxed out, tons of ping-ponging, tons of reverb, all of it. So this is definitely a credit where credit is due kind of situation. I haven't dialed this sound in before during my testing, and I actually quite like this, especially with no reverb on the dry signal. Okay, that is great, especially with that ability to kind of get all that clarity on your initial notes. That's actually a pretty amazing sound. I rescind everything I said earlier. I could also see that working really well. If you want your core notes to have just a tiny bit of reverb, you can throw something like a small plate in front of it. So you've got this. And then your trails can get really washy without losing too much of that initial attack. Okay, I dig that. That sounds really, really cool. Okay, we're jumping back over to the Skylar. Let's focus on some of the options that you've got. Let's actually kill the delay for a minute, and let's just dive straight into kind of the highlights on the reverb side, just briefly, and then we'll bring the two back together and do some pairings. I will always love the versatility of the plate on this thing. For giant washy reverbs like this, I tend to like to pull back a lot of that treble. Oh yeah, and you can pan your reverb. I've always appreciated how subtle the pre-delay on the GFI reverbs was. I never really want a lot of it, and so the absolute minimum they give you is to me is pretty great. Okay, this is one of the few shimmers that I like out there. The octave up's pretty good. Can be a little cheesy, but like the best of the octave up shimmers in the world is going to be a little cheesy. So that's if you've got it to ascending. Toss it into descending, and you've got yourself a much cooler reverb. And you've got your octave and your fifth options. It's so menacing in a way that I really like. It's pretty killer. Okay, I think that's going to do it. Let's go out with a weird pitch shifty thing I really enjoy into a massive ambient reverb. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy the Orca and the Skylar from GFI. They are pretty excellent. I am a fan.